As a nurse educator, we encounter a variety of learning styles in our classroom. Each of our students has their own unique preferences and strengths, and our goal is to be able to integrate a variety of teaching strategies in our classroom to support all of our diverse learners. If you're like me and you enjoy reading and you enjoy lectures, I realize that as an assimilator, when we explore Kolb's experiential learning theory and learning styles, that may not be how the majority of my students learn. In nursing, we often have a lot of tactile learners in our classroom. We also have divergers in our classroom. Those are the ones that like to kind of stand back and observe. And sometimes they may need that extra push to give them confidence that they can indeed engage in that clinical practice. Welcome back, everybody, to Dr. Sellars Educate, where our mission is to support all nurse educators to achieve success in the classroom and also to be successful on the NLN C&E exam. If this is the first time that you are tuning in to our Snapshot, welcome. We're delighted to have you. You notice the music playing in the background. That is an app that is available on Zoom if you use Zoom as a platform for your recordings or for your online learning experiences that you have with your students. Now, we know that music can lighten the mood, but it also can stimulate energy in the classroom. So we encourage you to use music to engage your students when they first walk in. When I was in my graduate level PhD program, that was a strategy that one of my faculty used, and I found it to be very energizing. When you've worked all day and you come into a 7 p.m. PhD course, it can really change your mindset. And that's the goal of providing music in our classrooms. If you are following along on your C&E journey, we're excited to support you. Or if you're just here to learn a little bit more about Kolb's experiential learning theory and learning styles, we're excited that you are joining us as well. If you want to go ahead and pull out that study worksheet, that's where we like to start with all of our snapshots. That's going to help you ensure that you stay focused as you move forward on your journey towards nurse educator excellence. So there are two things we want you to put on that worksheet. Number one is today's date, whatever date you're watching the snapshot. And number two, what is the objective? What is it that you want to achieve when you end the snapshot today? We hope that you do take some time to debrief and really reflect on the content that we've covered. And we hope that you'll tune in every single week where you'll find a snapshot to explore content that is aligned with the nurse educator competencies outlined by NLN. Speaking of those competencies, we want to go ahead and share. We're going to use a little bit different experience this time for you all. Since this is an online learning experience, we know that it can kind of get monotonous to look at the same content on a screen. So we're actually using our virtual backgrounds in this snapshot. We're going to use Prezi, and we're going to use Canva as well. So Canva is a web-based presentation platform that allows you to develop presentation slides. And the great thing we love about Canva is that you can access it anywhere as long as you have access to the internet. Okay, so this is the an image of the candidate handbook. You can see that this is for the C&E. There is a handbook that NLN has developed for each of the exams. Now, this one is 2023, as you can see right here. And if you go to nln.org and then you choose C&E, that's where you can find the handbook. The other resources that you want to make sure you have are going to include, you can see right here, Dr. Caputi's C&E review book, and then you have down here the 6th edition of Billings and Halstead. Now, we're using the 6th edition because the current exams are mapped back to the 6th edition, even though the 7th edition is available, and we know many colleagues have chosen to purchase the 7th edition, and you can absolutely still use that resource, okay? But you want to make sure you take a look at that crosswalk between the 6th and 7th edition to make sure you are using the appropriate content to close your knowledge gap. So let's go back to the candidate handbook and talk about what is included there. Well, first of all, we want you to print it out if you haven't already, and then you're going to use that detailed test blueprint that's included in every single handbook. Okay, so you have one for the C&E, the one for the C&ECL, and one for the C&E novice. That blueprint is really your roadmap. Okay, it's a critical piece on your journey, a critical step on your journey to ensure that you are closing all knowledge gaps and that you are knowledgeable about content that you will be tested on when you sit for the C&E exam. And we use the term C&E to cover all three exams. You want to make sure that you look at not only the detailed test blueprint, but also cover to cover. We want you to read it. The NLN organization has spent a lot of time updating this handbook, sometimes several times during the year. That was the case in 2023. So you want to make sure you're knowledgeable about content that's actually in the handbook. Any content that's included may show up on your C&E exam. We never know if those are pilot questions or if they're actual questions that they are evaluating to determine that you have the knowledge needed to achieve success on the C&E exam. What else do we know about the exam and how you best prepare? Well, we know there are 150 questions, and we know that you will have 3 hours to complete the exam. What else is it that you want to consider? It's focus. Okay, so that's step number one, making sure that you are focusing using your 7-week study plan to close your knowledge gaps. 50% of nurse educators have reported that they have been struggling with focus. Having a lot of distractions, being unclear about what they should focus on, what resources to use. And that's why we encourage you all to align with what NLN has guided us on as far as the resources. You only want to use Dr. Caputi's review book and Billings and Halstead Teaching and Nursing. Now, there are about 11 or so references listed in the handbook, and we're aware of that. However, these are the only two that colleagues need to achieve success. Dr. Caputi's review book is known as the Cliff Notes version. It's an excellent resource to help you have a general overview of concepts, but that deep learning really takes place with Billings and Halstead. Okay, and I know many of you, if you've tuned in before, you already know this information. So let's talk about what is it that we're going to cover today in the snapshot. Well, there are 4 different learning styles associated with Kolb's experiential learning theory. What we know about Kolb's theory is that it says we start the learning process when we actually are engaging in practice. Now, that can happen for our nursing students in the skills lab, in the sim lab, or in the clinical setting. What it is that we're talking about in this snapshot are those 4 different learning styles that we need to be aware of in order to best support our student success. So we have accommodating, you can see here, starting here, it's like a pie diagram, but we have accommodating, we have diverging, we have assimilating, which I know it's hard to see, and then we also have converging. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of these 4 types of learners, and most importantly, how can we best support the learning process so it continues? Okay, so the Kolb experiential learning theory is actually depicted as a cycle of learning. We have to go through all 4 phases of learning that we'll talk about in a future snapshot. And we will also be exploring that in our summer series. But Kolb's model talks about our ability to grasp and learn concepts when we go through all 4 of the phases associated with the learning cycle. But it first starts with practice, application. Okay, so if you don't have the resources that we've talked about, we don't want you to stress out about them. We just want you to make a note on that study worksheet to ensure that you have the right resources to close your knowledge gaps. When we think about the 4 different learning styles that Kolb has described for us, we want to consider what are those teaching strategies that we want to make sure we align with the everyday lesson plans that we're developing for our students. So that's going to include us taking a look at Billings and Halstead, as well as Dr. Caputi's C&E review book. So her review book is on page 35, where it describes in table 2.3 the 4 different learning styles, and most importantly, what are those teaching strategies we want to use to best engage those students? So first, we're going to talk about the diverger. These are the students that prefer to feel and watch. And we should note that even though we're talking about these 4 different types of learning styles, we know that students can vacillate between learning styles based on the situation that they experience, or even based on their comfort level with that specific clinical practice. So our divergers prefer to feel and watch, and we can see based on this image that there are all different types of learning styles that are present in this picture. So you can see we have some students that are standing back that are watching, and we also have some students that are experiencing direct patient care. You can see this is a simulation experience where the student is listening, it looks like, to abdominal sounds. And then we have another student that is perhaps assisting the student, maybe with insertion of an NG tube, perhaps. And then you have two other students that are observing. And then next is the assimilator. Now, they prefer to watch and think. Now, what are those behaviors going to look like? Well, first, for these assimilators, they're highly logical and organized. They enjoy reading and lectures. So we want to make sure we provide clear explanations and rationale. We want to give them time to process the information. And I'm an assimilator, and so I can definitely relate to this learning style and preference. And that's what I encourage you all to do, is to think about which is your learning style, and maybe think about the learning styles that you have in your classroom experiences with your students. And then next, we want to talk about taking a look at our convergers that think and do, and our accommodators that focus on doing and feeling. Certainly with our accommodators, they're ready to jump right in because they feel like they have the knowledge that they need to have those hands-on experiences. So they're often very excited about finally getting to the clinical experiences. And then our convergers are as well, but they're more of a processor, right? So they're excited about getting in and doing all of the clinical practices that we've talked about, but they also are processing that information. So with our convergers, it's always great that we engage in simulation. It's actually something that they really enjoy. They have a chance to practice it, to get feedback from us before they actually apply it to a real patient. Okay, so those students really enjoy assimilations. And next we want to talk about, let's see if we can figure out which way we're going to go. Okay, we need to go this way. That's the only thing I will say about Prezi. Sometimes figuring out which way to go can be a little bit confusing. But next we want to talk about what are these practices, nursing education practices we want to explore. Well, we want to include a variety. We may not know each individual's student's learning style, but we do know that there are 4 different types. And so we want to plan activities that are going to engage all different types. We want to engage in an enhanced learning experience with our students. And we do that by engaging in experiential learning. Patricia Benner's Novice to Expert model talks about the importance of us engaging in the clinical experience before students even arrive in the skills or clinical lab. We can introduce these concepts in the classroom, in the didactic experiences. And students that are more of the convergers and accommodators, they certainly enjoy these active learning strategies that we are using in our classroom through case studies as an example, through problem-based learning, through role playing. These are all great ways that we can introduce clinical application even before students arrive with those hands-on experiences. So let's take a look at our thought-provoking question. The nurse educator is evaluating the teaching strategies they used in the previous semester. Which teaching strategy is most suitable for learners with an accommodating learning style? We have 3 options. Now we know for the CNE exam, you may have 3 options or you may have 4. When you get to the question, we want you to consider 2 thoughts. Number 1, what is this question really asking me? And number 2, what is it that I know for sure about content included in this question? So if you get to a question about Kolb's learning style and you're not sure, can't remember the difference between an accommodator and a simulator, what we want you to write down on your scratch paper or your dry erase board, you should have one or the other, is to just write down what it is that you do know about Kolb's experiential learning style and learning theory. Okay, and hopefully that will trigger some recall for you to help you choose the correct answer. So we have reading assignments A, B, group discussions, or C, clinical practice. So we'll come back and take a look at our thought-provoking question answer, as well as the rationale as to why one answer is the right answer and the other 2 are not. So now we'll go back and continue our discussion and looking at the 4 different learning styles and how we can better integrate these teaching strategies into our students' learning experience. Sometimes when we're developing our teaching plans for our students, it requires us to take some additional training or maybe just brush up on how to develop a Jeopardy game as an example. It's okay to try new things and to let our students know that, you know what, I thought that I'd try something new, to engage in more learning experience, more hands-on learning experiences. And so I've developed this Jeopardy game, or I've developed this scavenger hunt, and we're going to work on engaging with this activity together. That adaptability, that flexibility with connecting with our students in a different way sends a really positive message to our students. It lets them know that we're trying different things and that we do want to engage all of our students in the learning process. We know that with the nursing shortage, and specifically with the nurse educator shortage, we are teaching future nurse educators, not only just future nurses. So we want to engage in these evidence-based practices, not only because it's the right thing to do to support learning, but also to role model these behaviors that we're talking about, that we want to engage our students in. This also allows us to provide personalized education, and using this approach to connect with our students to create this collaborative learning experience where students know that they have a brave space, that they can speak up, that they can advocate for closing their knowledge gaps or clarifying any muddy points that they may have. We want to also leverage these clinical experiences that our students are having by asking them about certain behaviors or certain clinical experiences that they are having in the actual healthcare setting. Oftentimes we feel like we have to give students the case studies or the scenarios, but we know that it's even more engaging for our students when they're able to share actual teaching and clinical experiences that they've been a part of. So we want to engage in this personalized education approach that really does take learning to the next level. And then we want to celebrate with our students getting to that finish line. We're able to see students learn over time. We've developed a solid curriculum that engages in a scaffolding approach where we build on prior experiences, prior learning, and the end result is that students are successful in our class and that they are successful on the NCLEX. So how do you best prepare for the CNE exam? We want to pull out that detailed test blueprint that we started talking about in the very beginning. This is going to help ensure that you do have what you need to close your knowledge gaps using only the resources that we have talked about earlier. And that's going to be Dr. Caputi CNE review book. Right now it is the 2nd edition, Billings and Halstead Teaching and Nursing, 6th edition. And then the third resource you're going to need is that detailed test blueprint that's included in the NLN CNE handbook. And if you have questions about content that is in that blueprint, just reach out to us, info@drsellarseducate.com, and we'll be happy to help support you closing your knowledge gaps. Success in the classroom, that's what your focus is all about, but also success on the CNE exam. You can see here that Professor Handy shared with us that not only was she able to receive the tools to be successful on the CNE in 60 days program, but also it was a clear path for her to identify what her roadmap was going to look like. We all are starting in a different place on our journey to CNE success. The CNE in 60 days program is just one of our many programs that gives you consistent support over the span of 6 weeks, so that you have an identified roadmap and you know what some of those landmines are going to be, those roadblocks. So we help you eliminate those or avoid those to help you stay on track. And then the other point we would make is when you're thinking about where you are today, write down what your commitment is going to look like. 100 to 120 hours is the estimated time that you will need to review content or to apply these concepts in order to achieve a passing score on the CNE exam. And we don't just make up this number. This is based on data that we have collected from hundreds of nurse educator colleagues across the country. All right, and then next step for you is going to be, as you write down what your study plan is going to look like, is going to be purchasing those textbooks, okay, and mapping out what your 7-week study plan is going to look like. If you're not familiar with that blueprint, the blueprint, you can print that out from the NLA Candidate Handbook. If you're not familiar with the 7-week study plan, you can find that on our website as well, but also right here in the description. And then the study workbook is one of the resources that we developed based on an early adopter who said, you know what, I feel like the resources with the textbook, the blueprint is great, but I feel like I need one more piece of information, one more resource, and that's why we developed the study workbook. That's also right here in the description. And we would recommend that as you're thinking about what your next steps are going to be, that you consider what's getting in the way, okay? Because mindset is also a barrier to our success. So making sure that you take the time to write down what your 7-week study plan is going to look like right on your study worksheet. And then we also want you to think about what barriers are going to get in the way and how you're going to overcome those barriers. All right, and now let's take a look as we wrap up at our thought-provoking question. Hopefully, you all were able to identify the correct answer, but if not, let's take a look at it together. If you chose clinical practice, you are correct. Reflecting back on our accommodator, we know that these are hands-on students. These are our students that are ready to do the action. They're ready to take the next step and apply the concepts that they have learned about in the classroom. And we also know that with our accommodator, it can be a challenge for them sometimes to process the information. And so we want to provide a supportive experience where we're giving them formative feedback so they can make corrections and they can improve their clinical practice. Sometimes these accommodators can become very frustrated if they feel like they thought they had the right strategy in place and they didn't take the right steps. So we want to always make sure that we support our nursing students by being present in the clinical setting and giving them lots of formative feedback. So you can see that our accommodators are here in this section of feeling and doing. So again, going back to the value of giving them formative feedback so that when they get to the end of that clinical experience or the end of that semester, they're able to gather that feedback and do well for that summative evaluation. All right, so this is going to conclude our time together. We hope that this content has been helpful. As always, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to us, info@drsellarseducate.com. We look forward to seeing you all in the next snapshot. Have a great one, everybody.